Something is wrong here. Why could only the chosen one use it? At first, that sounds like the easiest kind of answer. If something is meant for one person, then of course no one else can touch it, hold it, use it the same way. That feels clean. It feels settled. You hear that, and you think the line is already drawn. One person, one right to it, one fit. And maybe that would be enough. Maybe that would stay simple if everything around it stayed where it should. If the rules held. If the boundary meant what it seems to mean. But it does not sit that neatly. Because once you accept that only the chosen one could use it, something else starts pressing against that idea. Not loudly. Just enough. Just enough to make the answer feel a little too smooth. A little too complete. As if everyone was supposed to accept that line without looking at it for too long. And the longer you do look at it, the less comfortable it feels. Not because the answer disappears. Because it stays there, exactly where it was, and still does not settle anything. So why could only the chosen one use it? The first useful record is not a mythic one. It is a damage report. A square-headed hammer lies in a crater of broken asphalt under desert floodlights, and everything around it looks as though force was applied correctly and got nowhere. Tire ruts run outward in pairs. Chains remain hooked to the leather strap, not snapped but hanging loose, as if the vehicles found traction before the object offered movement. The trucks were heavy enough to drag armored carriers. Here they bent towing eyes, scored the pavement, and left the hammer exactly where it had landed. That makes the first explanation almost too clean. The thing is fixed by some extreme gravitational or inertial effect. Ordinary beings cannot lift it because, for them, it is effectively immovable. Then the inscription becomes legible in the side of the head, bright under the lamps. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. A warning label is not proof, but it does answer the towing failure more neatly than mass does. The trucks were not too weak. They were disqualified. That reading gains weight in the Asgardian exile record. On a polished platform, Odin stands over Thor while pale light leaves Thor's armor and sinks into the hammer. In the next image, Thor is on the rainbow bridge, kneeling, stripped of lightning, the inscription glowing across the metal. The sequence is procedural, not symbolic. Power removed from the sun. Condition added to the weapon. The hammer's behavior changes at the same moment. Thor's status changes. So the chosen one can use it, because Odin made access conditional. Not lineage in general, not strength, not ownership by habit. Worthiness. The object obeys a rule. For a while that covers everything visible. The desert crater, the failed machinery, Thor's inability to reclaim it during exile. Even the wording is operational. Holds, worthy, possess. A gate, then a transfer. But the bridge record leaves an awkward detail in plain sight. Thor is kneeling in front of the hammer, and cannot call lightning. If the inscription merely prevents lifting, why is the surrounding power gone as well? Odin did not just lock a handle. He altered a whole relationship between bearer and weapon. That still sounds manageable. Perhaps worthiness is the switch that reconnects Thor to what was taken from him. The hammer becomes a test device. Pass, and the power returns. Then the Earthside chronology complicates the neatness. Thor reaches the crater before he has changed. He strains, fails, and is thrown back by guards like any other trespasser. Later, after choosing to protect others while still powerless, he reaches for the same hammer, and it rises at once. No visible adjustment. No new ritual. No second command from Odin. The condition is being evaluated in real time, which raises the practical question the trucks never had to answer. What, exactly, is being measured? The inscription says worthy, but the evidence is narrower than morality and broader than strength. A prince can lose access to his own weapon. A room full of engines can produce force without producing movement. A hammer in a crater can behave like dead weight to everyone present, then become responsive the moment one fallen exile meets a standard that was not there before the words were cut into its side. If only the chosen one could use it, the choosing was happening at the hammer, or at the spell inside it. And the spell appears only after Odin decides Thor should no longer be what he had been. The first useful record is not a battle, but a surface change. Fresh letters burn into the side of the hammer as it descends through a column of light toward Earth. Before that moment, every earlier image in the archive shows the same weapon without them. In one older Asgardian hall, the hammer rests on Thor's open palm, plain-sighted, unmarked, carried as casually as a soldier's sidearm. No ceremony, no visible test, no pause before contact. If the question is why only the chosen one could use it, the timing narrows immediately. The restriction is not simply part of the hammer's metal. It appears when Odin sends Thor away. That makes the desert crater easier to read. The hammer lies under floodlights, surrounded by tire ruts, chains, bent towing gear, and a widening ring of failed efforting. The object has not changed shape. The ground around it has. Something in its behavior was altered in real time, and the inscription is the only visible intervention. For a while, that seems sufficient. Odin adds the condition. The hammer obeys. Ordinary beings cannot move it. Then the older footage keeps interfering. Thor had wielded it for years before the inscription appeared, and no public record shows any comparable worthiness trial before his banishment. If the hammer always judged character, the archives are strangely silent about it. If it only began judging after Odin's command, then worthy is less a timeless moral property than an active condition attached to the weapon at a specific moment. That explanation holds together neatly on the table in Stark Tower. The hammer sits motionless on glass, fingerprints and scuff marks around it, marking repeated, failed attempts. The failures are physical, not symbolic. Pressure applied, no displacement. Leverage increased, no translation. The table groans before the hammer yields. A rule has been imposed. The object now distinguishes between handlers. Then Vision enters the record. In a bright room, he stands with the hammer level at his side, while everyone else remains still. No strain, no build-up, no visible contest. If the condition were ordinary moral worth, the result would already be difficult to classify. Vision is not an ordinary human subject, not a prince under judgment, not a warrior with a history Odin could have weighed in any familiar way. Yet, the hammer responds at once. That pushes the question away from goodness and toward authorization. Perhaps the inscription does not ask, is this being virtuous? But something narrower. May this being carry what Odin has attached to the weapon? That would explain the chronology. Thor once used the hammer because no such gate had been installed. During exile, Odin adds one. The hammer's behavior changes immediately. The chosen one is not whoever the hammer has always preferred, but whoever now satisfies the imposed condition. Except the room itself complicates that. The others do not react as if Vision has bypassed a lock, through lineage, oath, or known as guardian standing. They react as if the result should have been impossible under the rule they had just been testing. If Odin's condition can admit Thor and also admit Vision, what exactly is being measured? Not species, not prior ownership, not simple morality. And if the inscription can be added after centuries of ordinary use, what else about the hammer's nature is only a late instruction written onto an older weapon? The first inventory record that matters is not from Earth at all. It places Mjolnir on a stone pedestal in a gold-lined Asgardian vault, centered beneath carved royal emblems rather than among ordinary weapons. The pedestal dimensions are excessive for storage and too formal for maintenance. Whatever else the hammer was, Asgard housed it as a state object. That helps with the first question. Why could only the chosen one use it? Because it may never have been treated as something meant for general use. Not a tool to be borrowed, but a royal implement assigned to one bearer. The mural in the Eastern ceremonial corridor pushes that reading further. Thor is shown with the hammer raised above ranked Asgardian soldiers. Not alone in a duel, not at a forge, not in a hunt. The composition is administrative as much as martial. Banners aligned, helmets turned upward, the hammer elevated like a standard. If Mjolnir was made as Thor's royal weapon, then restriction begins to look less like personal morality and more like office. A crown is not defective because others cannot wear it. That explanation holds long enough to clarify the wording of the inscription. Whosoever holds this hammer if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. Not shall borrow a weapon, but shall possess the power. The hammer appears to transfer station as well as force. In that light, worthy could mean fit to bear a specifically Asgardian burden. Command, violence under restraint, protection of a realm. The object on the pedestal and the figure in the mural line up cleanly. Then the ruined town record is reopened. Thor stands over fallen civilians with empty hands spread wide, fire moving behind him through broken walls and dust dust. No triumph pose, no raised weapon, no army beneath him. The report attached to the image notes that this is the period in which he becomes able to reclaim Mjolnir. That creates a practical problem for the office model. If the hammer recognizes a ruler, why does access return not in a throne room, not in a military review, but in a civilian disaster zone, where Thor is acting without insignia, command structure, or even the weapon itself? The answer seems close at hand. Perhaps the Asgardian ideal was never conquest or rank alone, but guardianship. The mural had been read too narrowly. A war king is still measured by whom he shields. The vault, the emblems, the inscription. The timing of Thor's return to worthiness. Together they suggest a narrower filter. Not any sovereign, but a protector capable of wielding sovereign force. For a while, that arrangement explains nearly everything. Then the battlefield image of Captain America is brought into comparison. Blue lightning runs from the hammerhead through his shield in the wreckage, and the energy pattern is not decorative. The current branches exactly as it does in Thor-associated strike records. The inscription's promise is operating literally. The bearer possesses the power of Thor. But Captain America is not Asgardian, not royal, not formed inside that political order. If Mjolnir is screening for a specifically Asgardian model of rulership and war, why does the transfer function outside Asgard's bloodline, outside its institutions, and in the hands of someone whose authority comes from an entirely different world? The pedestal, the mural, the ruined town, the battlefield. They still fit together, but no longer around the same center. The question is no longer just who is good enough to lift the hammer. It is what, exactly, the hammer is authorizing when it does. The cleanest explanation begins in a quiet room, not on a battlefield. The hammer is held out level by two fingers. No strain in the wrist, no bracing in the shoulder, no visible transfer of weight into the floor. Around it, the room records the failed alternative. A dropped bottle still rolling, chairs half turned, a glass table marked with fingerprints and scuffs, where stronger hands had tested leverage and lost. If the rule were simple moral worth, that image almost settles it. The hammer does not care about muscle, species, or appearance. It permits one bearer and refuses the rest. Then the table footage reopens. Under Captain America's grip, the hammer does not remain perfectly fixed. It rocks. Only a fraction, but enough to register on the tabletop and in the faces around him. The movement is too small to call success and too large to file with the others. If the object is locked by a binary condition, why is there an intermediate state at all? A scale of access suggests itself. Not worthy or unworthy, but nearing qualification, some threshold briefly approached and not crossed. That would account for the partial movement and the later full wielding. It even keeps the room scene intact. Vision may simply meet the condition immediately. The black stone plane interrupts that comfort. There the hammer does not resist, hesitate, or rock. It is caught one-handed in open motion by Hela, with cracks spreading under her boots from the force of the stop. A moment later, the head comes apart in fragments. No gradual admission, no visible negotiation with the enchantment. No sign that the object is testing her, and then yielding. If worthiness were the operative filter, the sequence should have stalled at contact. Instead, the restriction behaves as though it were absent, irrelevant, or subordinate to some older claim. The question changes shape, not who is good enough, but what kind of access bypasses the gate entirely. That would make the hammer less a judge than a locked conduit. Certain bearers can route power through it, others cannot. The room's scene still works under that reading. Vision's immediate lift would mean compatibility, not sainthood. Captain America's earlier movement could mark partial alignment before full authorization. Hela's catch would belong to a prior layer of ownership or status, strong enough to ignore the later lock. But the debris field above the plane keeps moving. Fragments of Mjolnir spin outward through stormlight, and Thor remains standing beneath them with lightning branching from his body. The energy pattern does not collapse with the weapon. There is no visible loss of source pressure, only a change in how it is expressed. If the hammer were the thing that made the Chosen One powerful, the storm should have ended with the break. Instead, the break isolates a different function. The object can be denied, budged, caught, shattered, and still the power continues elsewhere. So the restriction around Mjolnir may never have answered the whole question of who could use it. It may only answer who could use it in that form, under that inscription, after that point in its history. Which leaves the most practical problem still sitting in the evidence. Why do some hands meet a wall? Some move it a fraction, some lift it cleanly, and one tears straight through the rule as though the rule arrived late. The first useful record is not a battle account, but a line of wording cut into metal. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. That sentence invites the obvious answer. Only the Chosen One could use Mjolnir because the hammer screened for worthiness. The desert recovery footage seemed to support it. The square-headed hammer sat in a crater under floodlights, while chains, tow rigs, and military trucks failed one after another. No movement. No measurable drag. The object did not resist by weight alone. It simply did not transfer. Then the older images are laid beside it. In an earlier Asgardian hall, the same hammer rests on Thor's palm, with no inscription visible anywhere on the head. No public test. No hesitation. No ceremony of selection. Later on the cliff edge during Thor's exile, Odin faces him while storm clouds gather behind Thor's shoulders, and the hammer hangs between them. Pale force leaves Thor, and only then do the words appear. The chronology is awkward for the simple answer. If worthiness were the hammer's native rule, why does the rule arrive on screen as an added condition? That makes the next explanation feel cleaner. The hammer is not inherently judging anyone. Odin is. He rewrites its behavior in real time. The inscription is less a description than an instruction. That would explain why ordinary beings cannot lift it after the banishment, and why Thor, stripped of power, loses access until his conduct changes. It also fits the wording itself. The worthy bearer shall possess IDP, power of Thor. The hammer may not be asking, who is good? It may be asking, who may carry this office? The visual record from the arena pushes that idea further. Thor stands without the hammer, white lightning lashing from the sky into his bare hands. If his power can manifest with no Uru head, no leather strap, no inscribed conduit, then Mjolnir is not the source. Odin says as much on the cliff. It was meant to help him focus. That makes the object look less like a generator, and more like a controlled access point. For a moment, everything aligns. Only the Chosen One could use it, because only an approved bearer could route Thor's station and force through it. Then the battlefield footage of Captain America has to be placed on the table. In churned mud, with Mjolnir in one hand and the shield in the other, lightning strikes around him. The inscription is visible along the hammer's side while arcs of electricity crawl over his armor. There is no sign anywhere else in the record that he naturally commands storms. The lightning appears only with the hammer in hand. So the inscription is not merely locking the weapon. It is transferring a package of function, not just permission to lift. Operational access. That helps with one question and opens another. If Mjolnir channels Thor's power to a worthy bearer, then chosen may not mean sole heir, bloodline, or even original owner. It may mean temporary fit for transmission. But if the hammer is acting as a gatekeeper for office and force, rather than as a moral examiner, what exactly is being checked at the threshold? And why does the transfer look complete in one case, partial in another, and absent for everyone else? The oldest usable image is not a text at all, but a wall. High in Asgard, under later plaster and ceremonial gold, a mural survives in patches. Odin and Hela advancing across burning ground, ranks behind them, The hammer sign repeated above the army standard. The pigment around Hela's hand is damaged, but not enough to miss the shape. Short handle, square head, same proportions as the later weapon. If the question is why only the chosen one could use it, the mural begins by removing one easy answer. There was a time when Hela carried it openly, in war, under Odin's command. That could still leave room for a sacred restriction. Royal blood, perhaps. A dynastic weapon. The earlier chamber supports that at first glance. In the oldest royal room tied to the weapon, the hammer sits on a pedestal cut to its dimensions, centered beneath state emblems rather than temple marks. No warning text. No invocation. No carved formula around the base. It looks less like a relic under taboo, and more like issued regalia. Stored, displayed, returned. Then the battlefield record sharpens the problem. In a surviving combat tableau, Hela is not merely pictured with the hammer. She is using it in the middle of a rout. Fallen bodies spread behind her. Impact scoring visible in the ground pattern around her feet. The image is propagandistic, but the weapon is shown as active, not ceremonial. If access depended on the later standard of restraint, mercy, or humility, the chronology is wrong. This is conquest imagery. The hammer is present at the exact stage of Asgard's history. Later court records try to soften. So perhaps, chosen one once meant only this, chosen by the throne. A royal weapon for the ruling line, transferable within Odin's house as power shifted. That would fit Hela. It would fit Thor. It would explain why ordinary beings later failed, while Asgardian heirs did not need public testing. Except the inscription is absent from every early surface. Not weathered away. Not hidden by angle. The side panel where the later words appears plain in the chamber record and plain again in the conquest mural. The metal face is uninterrupted. The phrase associated with worthiness enters the evidence late, and it enters physically. Years after the campaigns, in a dim chamber from a later period, Odin stands over the hammer with one hand pressed to the head, while new letters ignite across the side. The wording is not inherited decoration. It is added behavior. That makes the restriction look recent, almost administrative, a rule imposed onto an older object. The chosen one could use it because Odin rewrote the terms. For a moment that settles nearly everything. Hela's access belongs to the earlier state. Thor's later loss belongs to the rewritten one. The hammer was not always screening for worthiness. It was made to do so. But the timing of the rewrite opens another pressure point. Why then? The hammer already existed. It had already served conquest. Odin had already built an empire with it in circulation. The new words appear only after that history, after repudiation, after exile. If the enchantment was meant merely to reserve the weapon for a rightful heir, why a condition at all? Why not name the heir directly? Why convert a royal instrument into something that could refuse its own prince? And if the rule was written against Odin's former way of ruling, the phrase, worthy, starts to look less like holiness than revision, an attempt to prevent the weapon from ever again serving the kind of hand that once used it freely. The first useful image is not the crater in New Mexico or the failed towing rigs. It is the hammer in controlled light, centered, inscription bright along one face, older dents and edge wear still visible beneath the glow. The metal records two histories at once. The damage belongs to use. The words belong to alteration. If only the chosen one could use it. The restriction was not born with the weapon. It was added to something already old enough to have been carried through battles. That makes the earliest access easier to sort. In the faded mural from Asgard's sealed lower gallery, Hela stands before a conquering army with the same hammer intact in her hand. No inscription is visible there. In a later chamber record, the hammer rests alone on a pedestal with the words cut in light across its side. The sequence is awkwardly clear. First a royal weapon in open use, later a restricted one. Hela's claim belongs to the earlier state. The question narrows. Not who could ever hold Mjolnir, but who could hold it after Odin changed it. The comparative images seem to settle that. Thor in a palace hall. Vision in a modern room. Captain America in battlefield wreckage. 3 different settings, 3 different bodies, 1 repeated condition. Each can bear the hammer when the inscription is already presented. That points away from bloodline and away from species. The gate is not Asgardian. It is not hair. It looks procedural, almost administrative. The hammer recognizes a bearer fit to receive what the inscription promises, the power of Thor. For a moment, that arrangement holds cleanly. The hammer is not choosing a soul in the abstract. It is authorizing access to an office, a charge, a package of force and status attached to Thor's station. That would explain why Captain America can call lightning only while holding it. The power arrives through the weapon. It would explain vision as well. Not human, not royal, yet somehow admissible as a bearer under the active rule. Then the last image refuses to stay quiet. Thor stands in open stormlight with no hammer in sight, lightning crowning him, broken stone around his feet. If Mjolnir is the source, that scene should not exist. If Mjolnir is the judge, the lightning should have ended with the fragments. Instead, the power remains while the vessel is gone. So the hammer is carrying something that Thor already possesses, not creating it, channeling it, lending it outward perhaps to whoever qualifies under the inscription. That makes the wording more precise than it first appeared. Shall possess the power of Thor does not say, shall become the source of it. The weapon may be a transfer point, not an origin, but that leaves the most practical difficulty in place. If the enchantment is added, and if the power belongs fundamentally to Thor, why do Thor, Vision, and Captain America each pass through the same object under different circumstances, while Hela belongs to a period before the rule existed at all? The old dents remain under the glowing words. The weapon was never remade, only rewritten. Whatever chosen means. It is sitting on top of an earlier history instead of replacing it, and the edge cases are still embedded in the metal.